The internet was meant to connect us to make the world smaller, faster, and more entertaining. But in the darker corners of the web, connection can turn deadly. Behind viral challenges, live-streamed stunts, and marathon gaming sessions lie stories that are as horrifying as they are tragic. Here are 5 of the most horrifying internet deaths ever. Real stories that reveal the terrifying price of living and dying online. It was August 3rd, 2005, in Daegu, South Korea. That night, 28-year-old Lee Seung-seop walked quietly into a dimly lit internet cafe tucked between other storefronts along a busy street. Lee picked a corner seat. He logged into StarCraft, and he never intended to stop. He wasn't anyone special, at least not on paper. A former boiler repairman, quiet, soft-spoken, thick glasses, usually seen in a plain gray uniform. He lived alone, kept to himself, and didn't cause trouble. But behind that quiet face was a growing obsession. Hours spent in internet cafes, known in South Korea as PC bangs, were his escape. For just $1 an hour, he could disappear. What began as a hobby quickly twisted into something else, something much harder to walk away from. Over time, Lee began to slip. First, it was skipped meals, then missed days at work. His friends noticed, then his boss. Eventually, he was fired. Around the same time, his girlfriend, also a gamer, walked out. On that fateful Wednesday, Lee sat down at a computer and launched into a marathon. Hour after hour, day after day. He didn't move much, just the occasional bathroom break, a quick nap on a makeshift bed in the corner. For nearly 50 hours straight, he played. The only sound in the room was the soft clicking of keyboards and the low hum of fans, keeping the PCs from overheating. By Friday evening, Lee's body was starting to give up. His mother hadn't heard from him, and her worry had grown into panic. She reached out to his old co-workers, asking them to check on him. They found him still sitting at the terminal, eyes fixed on the screen. He looked terrible, but when they asked if he was okay, he simply told them he'd leave after he finished the game. He never did. Before the match ended, Lee collapsed. One of the gamers nearby, Kim Jin-yu, recalled watching him fall, his head snapping back, eyes shut, face slack. At first, no one moved. It wasn't unusual for someone to doze off at a terminal, but this was different. An ambulance was called. He was rushed to Daegu Fatima Hospital. The doctors said it was heart failure brought on by exhaustion and severe dehydration. His body had simply run out of fuel. In 2005, South Korea had one of the most connected populations on Earth. Over 70% of households had broadband internet. Online games like StarCraft weren't just popular, they were a way of life. Among people aged 9 to 39, gaming was more common than watching TV. The gaming industry earned over $1 billion that year, and for many, these games offered more than entertainment. They offered identity. After his death, South Korean officials scrambled. They called for reforms, insisting this wasn't about a game. It was about health, neglect, and mental collapse. They started enforcing curfews, banning minors from entering PC bangs after 10 p.m. Developers added on-screen warnings to encourage players to take breaks. Health workers even began checking in at cafes. But the damage was already done. More cases followed, more headlines, including one horrifying incident where a baby died after being left alone while her parents played an online game for hours. People began to realize this wasn't just a South Korean problem. It was a mirror, showing us what can happen when a digital world becomes more real, more rewarding than life itself. It was the morning of May 15th, 2011, in Brisbane, Australia. 20-year-old Acton Beale had just returned home to his apartment in Kangaroo Point after a night out with friends. He was cheerful, energetic, and, like so many young people at the time, fascinated by a strange, new internet craze planking. The concept was simple. Lie face down, completely stiff like a board, in the most unusual place you could find. Arms by your sides, body straight, someone snaps a picture and you post it online. The more bizarre or daring the location, the more viral the post. What began as harmless fun on living room floors and park benches had quickly evolved into a global competition for attention, with people planking on cars, rooftops, and even moving vehicles. That morning, Acton decided to take it one step further. He attempted to plank on the railing of his 7th-floor balcony, a ledge barely 5 centimeters wide. His friend, who had been with him earlier, said they had been trying out different planking spots throughout the night. This was supposed to be their last one. According to Queensland Police Deputy Commissioner Ross Barnett, Acton tried to balance himself on the narrow edge, but as he moved into position he lost his footing. In a split second he fell 7 stories. Witnesses nearby heard a loud crash, but few understood what had happened until emergency services arrived. Paramedics tried desperately to revive him for nearly 20 minutes, but Acton didn't make it. It became the first known fatality linked to the planking trend. Until then, the challenge had been viewed as silly and reckless, but not deadly. His death changed that perception overnight. Police later confirmed that Acton had consumed alcohol before the fall, which may have affected his balance and judgment. Deputy Commissioner Barnett addressed the media soon after, clarifying that planking itself wasn't illegal, but the growing trend of taking extreme risks for photos had become deeply concerning. "People are pushing the limits for attention," he said, and sadly, that's when tragedy happens. Just days earlier, another man had been arrested in Queensland for planking on top of a police car, facing trespassing charges. Authorities in Queensland and Victoria had already begun warning the public that dangerous planking stunts could lead to serious injury or death. Acton's death quickly made headlines across Australia and around the world. It sparked nationwide discussions about the dark side of viral challenges and how easily social media trends can turn fatal. Then, Prime Minister Julia Gillard called the incident really tragic, reminding people of the difference between harmless fun and life-threatening risk. Tributes soon poured in online. A Facebook memorial page titled R.I.P. Acton Beale was created, filled with kind words from friends and strangers alike, describing him as funny, kind-hearted, and full of life. But as often happens on the internet, tragedy attracted cruelty. Trolls began posting hateful and mocking comments, even uploading a video that made light of his death. The video was quickly removed, but the damage had been done. The page was eventually locked to prevent further abuse. The online planking community faced backlash too. The Planking Australia Facebook page, which had nearly 90,000 followers, suddenly found itself under intense scrutiny. Some users defended the trend, insisting that most people planked safely. Others said the movement had spiraled out of control. "It was meant to be harmless fun," said one user, "but now people are dying for likes." Authorities began cracking down. In Victoria, officials announced that anyone caught planking on railway property could face a fine of $293. New South Wales police said they were preparing a statewide safety campaign warning against risky stunts. On a hot summer morning in Nara, Japan, crowds gathered outside Yamato Saidaiji Station, eager to hear from Shinzo Abe, the longest-serving prime minister in Japanese history, a man whose leadership had shaped modern Japan. He wasn't just another politician. To many, he was a symbol of stability in a world growing more uncertain by the day. At 67, though no longer in office, Abe remained a giant in Japanese politics, his voice still commanding respect across the nation. And that morning, he stood on a small platform, speaking with the calm confidence of a man who had addressed countless rallies before. Then, in a moment that seemed impossible in a country famed for its safety and strict gun laws, everything changed. From the edge of the crowd, a man stepped forward with a crude, homemade weapon, something no one even recognized as a firearm at first. The first shot rang out like a firework, confusing those nearby. Abe turned instinctively, his face registering surprise, but before his guards could react, the second blast thundered through the square. This time, the pellets struck him in the chest and neck. The former prime minister staggered, his hand rising as if to steady himself before collapsing face first onto the street. The crowd screamed, security lunged, and within seconds, one of the most shocking acts of political violence in modern Japanese history had taken place. For a country where shootings are so rare they make front-page news even when non-fatal, the assassination was unthinkable. Shinzo Abe was airlifted to the hospital, doctors battling to save him for hours, transfusing 100 units of blood in a desperate fight, but the wounds were too grave. At 5:03 p.m., the announcement came. Abe was dead. The entire world reeled. The assassin, 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami, was seized on the spot. His motive stunned the nation as much as the act itself. Yamagami wasn't a foreign agent or a radical revolutionary. He was a man consumed by a personal grudge. His family had been torn apart by the Unification Church, a controversial religious movement tied for decades to Japan's conservative politicians. His mother's devotion had bankrupted the family, leaving him bitter and broken. To Yamagami, Abe wasn't just a former prime minister. He was a symbol of that political-religious alliance, one of the most powerful figures to ever support the church. And so, he decided that killing Abe was the only way to strike back. What followed was chaos, outrage, and uncomfortable truths. For decades, whispers had surrounded the ties between Japanese leaders and the Unification Church, but they were largely ignored. Abe's grandfather, Nobusuke Kishi, had helped foster the church's influence in Japan, and the connections ran deep within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. After the assassination, the lid blew off. Politicians were forced to admit links, cabinet ministers confessed to accepting support, and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's government scrambled to contain the fallout. Public trust plummeted. Demonstrations grew. Suddenly, the death of Abe, intended as a single act of vengeance, was unraveling the very political establishment he once led. The shock spread beyond Japan. And then came the haunting thought, had this been preventable? Security lapses became glaring in hindsight. The shooter had walked right up behind Abe, within meters. With a bulky weapon, no one stopped. The first shot was dismissed as a strange noise, giving him time to fire again. Police chiefs resigned in disgrace, admitting failure. In the end, Abe had died not just because of one man's hatred, but because the system designed to protect him had faltered at the worst possible moment. On September 27, 2022, Japan held a rare state funeral for Shinzo Abe. Thousands lined the streets as his motorcade passed, some waving flags, others silently weeping. The event was broadcast worldwide, cementing Abe's place in history, not just as a prime minister, but as the victim of an act that shattered Japan's illusion of safety. It was March 2, 2024, in Lancaster, a city in northwest England. 11-year-old Tommy Lee Gracie Billington was having a sleepover at a friend's house on Greenset Close. Sometime during the sleepover, Tommy Lee tried something he'd seen online, a dangerous social media trend known as chroming. The challenge involved inhaling fumes from everyday household products like deodorant, paint, or nail polish remover to feel a quick, dizzying high. What many don't realize is that the chemicals can cause the heart to stop almost instantly. For Tommy Lee, that's exactly what happened. He inhaled one of the substances, collapsed, and went into sudden cardiac arrest. He never woke up again. At 12:04 p.m. that Saturday, an emergency call came through to Northwest Ambulance Service. A young boy was unresponsive. When police arrived, Tommy Lee was still unconscious. He was rushed to the hospital, but doctors couldn't save him. By that afternoon, he was gone. At first, officials listed his death as unexplained, but his family knew the truth. Just days later, his grandmother, Tina Burns, shared her heartbreak online. She revealed that Tommy Lee had died after trying the TikTok craze called chroming. Tommy Lee was described as bright, kind, and full of energy. He lived with his mother, Sherry, in Lancaster, while his father's family lived in nearby towns. In her own post, Sherry pleaded with parents to lock away household chemicals and to talk to their children about the dangers of viral challenges. "Hide all the deodorants," she wrote. "They cost my son his life." Chroming isn't new. It's an old form of inhalant abuse once known as huffing or sniffing. But social media has given it a deadly revival. The shocking part? The trend is spreading among younger and younger kids, many of whom don't understand the risks until it's too late. As investigators dug deeper, the case widened. 2 adults were questioned in connection with Tommy Lee's death. A 25-year-old man from Lancaster was arrested on suspicion of child neglect and possession of harmful substances. He was later released on bail. A 35-year-old woman was also interviewed and released under investigation. While the official cause of death remains listed as unexplained, Tommy Lee's family has no doubts chroming was involved. Tina Burns has since turned her grief into purpose. As a teaching assistant, she's begun speaking in schools, warning students and parents alike. Many parents, she says, had no idea such trends existed. Some even deleted social media apps from their children's phones after hearing her story. Tommy Lee's family is now pushing for real change. They want stricter rules to protect children, including banning social media for anyone under 16 and holding platforms accountable for allowing deadly trends to circulate unchecked. Medical professionals are backing their call. Dr. Lawrence Cunningham, a retired physician, warned that inhaling toxic fumes can lead not only to instant cardiac arrest, but also to severe brain and organ damage. According to the UK charity Resolve, deaths from solvent inhalation had declined over the years, from 152 in 1990 to 38 in 2020. But experts now fear the numbers could rise again as dangerous challenges reappear online.
Twitch streamer Pashi Brid has been found dead after a 24-hour streaming session for charity on Twitch.
The night was supposed to be one of generosity and joy, a 24-hour charity live stream for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. But somewhere between fatigue and devotion, a tragedy unfolded live, in real time, before an audience that never realized what they were witnessing. Brian Vigneault, known online to thousands as Poshibrid, was 35, a father of 3, and a beloved face in the World of Tanks gaming community. On that February night in 2017, he was already 22 hours deep into a marathon stream from his home in Virginia Beach. His goal was simple: raise money to help sick children. But as the hours wore on, his voice grew quieter, his movements slower. The chat noticed. "You look tired," one viewer typed. "Go get some sleep," another urged. He smiled weakly, shrugged it off, and said he'd take a quick smoke break. Then he got up from his chair, stepped away from the camera, and never came back. At first, viewers thought he'd fallen asleep. The chat continued, lighthearted at first, then uncertain, then eerily silent as minutes turned to hours. What they didn't know was that somewhere off-screen, Brian had collapsed. When police arrived at his Virginia Beach apartment later that evening, he was already gone. The official call was cardiac arrest. No foul play, no visible harm, just a man whose body had finally given in after hours of pushing past its limits. Friends and fellow streamers said he'd looked exhausted long before he left. He was in rough shape, recalled Jessica Gebauer, another streamer who had been watching him. "We were all telling him, stop, rest, the stream can wait." But for Brian, the cause was bigger than himself. He wanted to finish what he started, one last act of kindness for charity. What followed was an outpouring of shock and heartbreak. The gaming community, used to seeing long-hour marathons as a badge of dedication, suddenly saw the darker side of that culture. Experts pointed out the mounting pressure in streaming, the endless competition for views, donations, and recognition that pushes creators to their physical edge. "It doesn't seem that grueling on the surface," one professor said, "but you're playing, performing, and putting off your basic human needs for hours." Brian wasn't reckless. He'd done marathons before. He'd raised nearly $11,000 for charity over his 5-year streaming career. He was loved, respected, and genuinely funny, known for his sarcastic humor and for being the kind of gamer who'd yell at the screen one minute and laugh the next. Behind all that, though, he was also a father trying to do something meaningful. In the days that followed, his friends set up a GoFundMe page for his children, and messages poured in from across the world, from fellow gamers, fans, even strangers. His clan in World of Tanks, known as Fame, posted a heartfelt tribute, remembering him as both a fierce competitor and a friend who never hesitated to help others. To this day, no one knows exactly what caused Brian's sudden death, but what's clear is this: even in his final hours, he was giving. He died doing something he loved, trying to make life brighter for others. It's easy to forget that behind every stream is a human being, someone who needs sleep, food, and rest, just like anyone else. Brian's story is a haunting reminder that sometimes, even acts of kindness can carry a heavy cost when we forget to take care of ourselves.
Journalist Yelena Kostyuchenko is having a first look at what used to be the office of Anna Politkovskaya, her colleague, shown here in archive footage. Now it's a museum in her honor.
It was an October afternoon in Moscow. In a quiet apartment block in the center of the capital, a woman stepped into the elevator, balancing bags in her hands, just moments away from the safety of her own front door. That woman was Anna Politkovskaya, one of Russia's bravest journalists, a relentless truth seeker who had built her career on exposing the things the Kremlin wanted hidden. Seconds later, 4 gunshots rang out. By the time the doors slid shut, she lay lifeless on the floor, a pistol tossed beside her body like a signature left behind. It was October 7th, 2006, Vladimir Putin's birthday, a coincidence that would haunt the world. Politkovskaya was no ordinary reporter. She had spent years covering the bloody Chechen wars, documenting the disappearances, the torture, the mass graves. She wrote about the civilians caught between Russia's military and the brutality of Chechen warlords, never flinching even when her words painted her own government as complicit in crimes against humanity. Her book, Putin's Russia, accused the president and his inner circle of dragging the nation back into a Soviet-style abyss, suffocating dissent, feeding fear, and treating citizens like expendable pawns. She knew the risks of saying such things out loud, and yet she kept going. In one of her final essays, she admitted, "Otherwise, it can be death, the bullet, poison, or trial. Whatever our special services see fit." Those words would prove prophetic. The threats against her had been mounting for years. In 2004, on her way to Beslan to help negotiate during the school hostage crisis, she collapsed on a plane after drinking poisoned tea. In Chechnya, soldiers once staged a mock execution to terrify her into silence. Anonymous voices promised her rape, promised her death, promised her disappearance. Friends urged her to leave Russia. Former KGB officer Alexander Litvinenko even warned her. The danger was imminent. She refused. If anybody thinks they can take comfort from the optimistic forecast, let them do so, she wrote. But it is the death sentence for our grandchildren. She believed her country's future depended on voices like hers refusing to be silenced. And yet, in the end, the silencing came. 4 bullets, one of them to the head, executed with chilling precision. Investigators called it a contract killing, designed to send a message. The timing was impossible to ignore. Her assassination fell on the exact day of Putin's 54th birthday, just 2 days after Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov's birthday celebrations. Many wondered, was this a macabre gift, a demonstration of loyalty to power? Or was it simply the perfect moment to deliver maximum humiliation to a government already despised by her pen? The shockwaves spread instantly. Colleagues at Novaya Gazeta, the independent paper where she worked, didn't mince words. She had been killed for her reporting, nothing else. International governments demanded justice. Crowds gathered with candles outside the Russian embassy in Helsinki, in Moscow, in New York, in Paris, in London. More than 1,000 mourners filed past her coffin at the Troyekurovsky cemetery, but not a single senior Russian official appeared at her funeral. It was as though the state preferred to erase her existence rather than acknowledge her sacrifice. The investigation that followed felt less like a pursuit of justice and more like a performance staged for the world. Suspects were arrested, then acquitted, then retried. Chechen men were paraded through courts. Former police officers were accused of orchestrating her murder. In 2014, 5 men were convicted, 2 given life sentences. And yet, the most important question, who ordered the hit, remains unanswered to this day. Powerful figures were whispered about, connections to the FSB hinted at, but the truth was buried beneath layers of secrecy. One of her alleged killers, Sergei Kadjikurbanov, was even pardoned in 2023 after fighting in the war in Ukraine. It was as if the system itself was mocking her memory, recycling killers back into service.
There are some TikTok trends you shouldn't try at home, like fractal wood burning, that cost a Wisconsin couple their lives.
It was morning in Roseeville, Wisconsin, April 6, 2022. Inside a quiet suburban garage, 2 people, 44-year-old Tanya Rodriguez and 52-year-old James Karolfi, were chasing something new, something creative. They'd recently discovered a mesmerizing craft called fractal wood burning. The process looked almost magical. Jolts of electricity carving lightning-like patterns into wood soaked in a chemical solution. On TikTok and YouTube, the results looked beautiful and hypnotic even. But beauty can be deadly when electricity is involved. That morning, Tanya and James weren't using a professional setup. They had built their own machine from pieces of old microwaves and car batteries. It could generate thousands of volts, more than enough to kill a person in an instant. Sometime during the process, something went wrong. No one heard a scream, no cry for help, just silence. The current arced through their bodies, stopping both of their hearts almost instantly. Minutes later, that same surge of power likely triggered a fire. Flames began to crawl through the garage, devouring everything around them. By the time firefighters arrived, the home was engulfed. When they finally broke through the smoke and debris, they found Tanya and James lying in the garage, the exact spot where the blaze had begun. Investigators treated it as suspicious. Lieutenant Mark Waggers of the Marathon County Sheriff's Office announced they weren't ruling anything out. It could have been a murder, a setup, or something even darker. Detective Eric Anderson began digging. Tanya and James weren't married, but they had a long, complicated relationship full of tension, breakups, and reconciliations. Tanya had also been seeing another man, Brad Harrison, whose temper was well known in town. Neighbors described loud fights, shouting matches that sometimes ended in threats. One neighbor even claimed she heard what sounded like gunshots the night before the fire. Police didn't hesitate. Brad Harrison already had a warrant out for a small issue, but enough to bring him in. When they found him at work in Tomahawk, sitting in his car and under the influence, the tension cracked open. He admitted he'd argued with James recently. He said James had damaged his car with a baseball bat. But when asked if he had hurt Tanya or James, Brad denied everything. He insisted they must have been involved in something dangerous themselves. When the autopsies came back, everything shifted. Deputy Medical Examiner Leah Scheit discovered something shocking. Neither Tanya nor James had soot in their airways. That meant they hadn't been breathing when the fire started. They were already dead, but there were no signs of gunshot wounds, no blunt force trauma, no poison. Whatever had killed them had done so silently and instantly. Then came the clue that changed everything: the wire around Tanya's legs. It wasn't used to tie her up. It had wrapped around her naturally. The burns on their bodies, the equipment found nearby, even the strange scorch marks on the wood, all pointed to one horrifying conclusion: fractal wood burning. When investigators returned to the garage, the evidence was undeniable. Microwave parts, car batteries, stripped wiring, all the telltale signs of a homemade high-voltage fractal burning setup. Friends confirmed that Tanya and James had recently been obsessed with trying it, but the horror didn't end there. Deputies went public with a chilling warning. "This method has already killed at least 33 people," said Sheriff's Deputy Chad Bleb. "It's not art, it's a death trap." The American Association of Woodturners had banned the technique back in 2017, but online tutorials kept spreading, fueled by viral videos and false confidence.
Sir David Amess, who was knighted in 2015, was an MP for 38 years, latterly as the representative for Southend West, where he held a majority of 14,000 at the last general election.
On the morning of October 15th, 2021, Sir David Amess, a Conservative MP with nearly 4 decades of service, arrived at Belfairs Methodist Church Hall in Leigh-on-Sea, Essex. For him, this was routine. A constituency surgery where ordinary people could walk in, shake his hand, share their problems, and know that someone in power was listening. He had built his entire career on being approachable, a man of the people. But that very openness, the thing his community admired most, would be the reason his life ended in horror. Inside the church hall, Amess sat down to meet his constituents, unaware that among them was a man carrying a knife, waiting for the moment to strike. As conversations unfolded, the attacker suddenly emerged, lunging forward and stabbing Amess repeatedly in front of stunned onlookers. Panic filled the small hall. People screamed, staff rushed for help, and paramedics arrived within minutes. An air ambulance landed nearby, but his wounds were too severe. Despite desperate attempts to save him, David Ames was pronounced dead at 1:13 p.m. The man arrested at the scene was Ali Harbi Ali, a British citizen who later admitted he was inspired by the ideology of Islamic State. He had planned the killing for years, scouring the names of MPs who voted for UK airstrikes in Syria, and even scouting out other targets before settling on Ames. What makes this even more chilling is the cold calculation. Ali had researched more than 250 MPs, studying their movements, waiting for a chance to strike at the heart of British democracy. For the public, the murder was unthinkable. Ames wasn't a prime minister or a cabinet minister surrounded by layers of security. He was a local MP who held no senior government office, someone who spent his weekends speaking with the people of Southend West. He had campaigned passionately for animal welfare, supported Brexit, and fought tirelessly to have Southend granted city status. He was known as kind, approachable, and deeply committed to his Catholic faith. That such a man could be targeted while doing the very thing that defined him, listening to his people, sent shockwaves far beyond Essex. Tributes poured in almost instantly. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, opposition leader Keir Starmer, and colleagues from across the political divide stood united in grief. Vigils were held, church bells tolled, and communities mourned a man who had never shied away from meeting face-to-face with those he served. To his constituents, he was not just an MP, he was a neighbor, a familiar figure who always made time for a chat. But behind the mourning lay something darker. Ames himself had once written in his autobiography that the killing of Joe Cox in 2016 had spoilt the great British tradition of the people openly meeting their elected politicians. He feared that one day MPs would no longer be safe in the simple act of engaging with their communities. In a haunting twist of fate, those very words became a prophecy of his own death. Ali Harbi Ali later stood trial at the Old Bailey, showing no remorse. He smirked in court, declared he had no regrets, and justified his act as part of a twisted ideology. The judge called him a cold, calculated, and dangerous individual, sentencing him to life in prison with no chance of release. For Ames's family, there was no relief in the verdict. "We shall never get over this tragedy," they said. Their grief only deepened by the thought that a husband, father, and grandfather was stolen from them in such a brutal way. In the weeks that followed, tributes to Ames turned into legacy. Southend was officially granted city status, fulfilling one of his greatest political campaigns. Colleagues called him a martyr for democracy, a reminder that in an age of political division, violence must never silence debate.
A 17-year-old broke his leg and was bored. He did something very typical, played a video game. But that's where the normality ends. The Russian teen, identified by local outlets as Rustam, died after reportedly playing a game for 22 days straight.
He was just 17, a teenager named Rustam from the quiet industrial town of Ushali, deep in Russia's Republic of Bashkortostan. Like so many kids his age, Rustam loved video games. But after breaking his leg that summer, what began as a simple way to pass the time slowly transformed into something much darker, something that would eventually consume him entirely. With his leg in a cast and movement painful, Rustam withdrew into the one world where he still felt in control, the digital battlefield of defense of the ancients, Edut. At first, it seemed harmless enough. Friends visited to check in, and his parents occasionally peeked through the door to see him laughing at the screen, immersed in gameplay. But over time, the laughter faded, the visits stopped, and Rustam's world shrank to the size of his dimly lit bedroom. Days turned into nights, nights into days. The glow of the monitor became the only light source he needed. He played for hours, then days, with barely any breaks, stopping only to grab a quick snack, use the bathroom, or collapse for a short nap before returning to the game. It went on like that for 22 consecutive days. His parents would hear the steady clatter of keys, the soft muttering to himself, the muffled bursts of frustration or victory, a rhythm that became part of the house's background noise. Until one morning, that rhythm stopped. On August 30th, the house was unusually quiet. No clicks, no keyboard, no sign of movement. When his mother finally pushed open the door, she found Rustam slumped in his chair, his head tilted forward, hands still resting on the keyboard. At first, she thought he'd fallen asleep again, but when she touched his shoulder, his skin was cold. Panic set in. They rushed him to the hospital, but it was already too late. Doctors confirmed the unthinkable. Rustam had died of deep vein thrombosis, DVT, a blood clot caused by prolonged immobility. The same silent killer known to strike passengers on long-haul flights had now taken the life of a teenager, alone in his room, locked in a digital war that never truly ended. The autopsy revealed that his sedentary state, dehydration, and extreme exhaustion had combined to trigger the fatal clot. Police investigators later uncovered something even more haunting. Over the past year and a half, Rustam had logged more than 2,000 hours of gameplay, nearly 3 full months of his life spent staring at a screen. Since his leg injury on August 8th, he had been almost entirely confined to his chair, playing continuously, pausing only for minutes at a time. His parents were devastated, unable to comprehend how a hobby they once saw as harmless could turn deadly. "We thought he was just passing the time until his leg healed," his father told local reporters. "We never imagined it could end like this." Russian authorities were shaken too. A regional children's rights advocate, Aigul Siweva, publicly warned parents that gaming addiction was becoming a hidden epidemic, one of the most dangerous yet overlooked threats facing young people. Medical experts echoed the sentiment, comparing Rustam's condition to economy class syndrome, a fatal disorder that strikes when blood clots form from sitting still too long without circulation. The tragedy made national headlines, sparking debates across Russia about youth isolation, mental health, and the growing culture of digital escapism. To many, Rustam's death symbolized something larger, a generation vanishing into screens, where virtual triumphs replace real-world connection. Friends from his online circle later shared that Rustam was an incredible teammate, someone always online, always ready to play. In the gaming world, he was alive and celebrated, but in reality, his health was collapsing in silence. Rustam's death wasn't just a freak accident. It was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that even the most innocent escapes can turn lethal when obsession takes over. The human body has limits, even if the digital world doesn't. He didn't die in a crash, a fight, or an accident. He died sitting still, in the same position he'd held for weeks, chasing victory in a world that never truly cared if he won or lost.
This morning, the loss of a 5th grader killed as the result of a viral online challenge. Carson Bodkins was found dead in his bedroom last Thursday after he choked himself as part of a game.
It was May 1st, 2019, in Evansville, Indiana. 15-year-old Mason Bogard had just come home from school. He hugged his dad, told his mom he loved her, and went upstairs. Just another ordinary afternoon in the Bogard household. Minutes later, everything changed forever. Mason was the youngest of 3 children. He loved fishing, cooking, and making people laugh with his goofy sense of humor. He was close to his parents, Joanne and Steve, and had a good head on his shoulders, the kind of kid every parent hopes to raise. When Mason first asked for a smartphone, Joanne hesitated. She set up parental controls, installed safety apps, and made sure to talk to him about the dangers of the internet. Mason wasn't into social media much. He preferred watching YouTube videos about the outdoors and fishing. Then one day, he came across a viral challenge. He showed the video to his mom, laughing, thinking it looked harmless. Joanne warned him that some online trends weren't as innocent as they seemed. 2 weeks later, her worst fear became reality. That evening, everything seemed normal. Mason told his parents goodnight and went upstairs to shower. Minutes later, a loud crash echoed from his room. His father, a firefighter, rushed upstairs and found Mason unconscious, a belt around his neck. His pulse was gone. Steve began CPR immediately, fighting to bring his son back. Paramedics arrived and rushed Mason to Deaconess Hospital, where he was placed on life support. But the damage had already been done. Days later, doctors told the Bogards that Mason had suffered irreversible brain injury. On May 6th, Mason was declared clinically brain dead. his parents made an impossible decision to honor his wish of becoming an organ donor. Mason's organs saved 5 lives. As he was wheeled down the hospital hallway, nurses, doctors, and family members lined up in silence to say goodbye. It wasn't until afterward that Joanne discovered what had happened. She learned that Mason had attempted something called the choking challenge, a deadly online trend where kids intentionally cut off their oxygen to feel lightheaded or get a brief high. Some record themselves and share it online for views, unaware of how quickly it can go wrong. Mason had no idea how dangerous it was. On his phone, his parents later found a short video of Mason smiling, talking to his dog, as he unknowingly put himself in grave danger. Authorities couldn't officially link his death to the trend, as no search history tied him to it, but Joanne didn't need proof. To her, the video said it all. She believed Mason didn't even look for the challenge, that the algorithm suggested it to him, the same way it had to countless other teens. On May 10th, family and friends gathered for Mason's funeral. Lanterns floated into the night sky, and fireworks lit up the air in his memory. Donations poured in for the causes he cared about, the Indiana Donor Network and the Wounded Warrior Project. But Joanne wasn't ready to let her son's story end there. Determined to make a difference, she began speaking publicly about Mason's death, warning parents about the dangers hidden in online algorithms. Their fight led to Mason's Education Act, passed in Indiana, requiring schools to teach children about internet safety and digital responsibility. Joanne also testified before Congress, standing alongside other parents, holding up pictures of their lost children while demanding answers from tech executives. Her message was simple but powerful. The online world needs the same protections as the real one. Her advocacy didn't stop there. On July 30th, the U.S. Senate passed the Kids Online Safety Act, designed to hold social media companies accountable for harmful content and give parents more control. The bill is currently awaiting approval from the House of Representatives. Joanne also joined Project Liberty, a movement funded by billionaire Frank McCourt, aiming to rebuild the internet into a safer, more transparent space, especially for children. One of their boldest goals is to purchase and redesign TikTok, removing manipulative algorithms that push dangerous trends. "If I had that kind of control 5 years ago," Joanne said, "I believe Mason would still be here." Now, she spreads awareness through Ron Asher Mason's message, partnering with organizations like Fair Play, which educates families about how apps keep users hooked with reward systems and endless scrolls. Despite rules protecting children in the real world, she says, the online world remains largely unregulated, and that must change. On 14th and February 2005, Beirut's skies were clear, the streets alive with their usual traffic. Rafik Hariri, billionaire businessman and former prime minister, had rebuilt much of war-torn Beirut and symbolized the dream of a Lebanon free from Syrian occupation. But as his motorcade passed the St. George Hotel along the Corniche, that dream was obliterated in a blinding flash of fire and steel. A Mitsubishi truck packed with nearly a ton of explosives ripped through the convoy, carving a crater 30 feet wide, shattering windows for blocks, and setting cars ablaze. Hariri, his bodyguards, and 21 others were killed. Over 200 were wounded. The heart of Beirut was left burning, and the city was left asking who wanted Hariri dead. Hariri had recently broken with Damascus, openly opposing President Bashar al-Assad's grip over Lebanon. Months earlier, Assad had allegedly threatened him. Lahoud is me. Opposing him is opposing Assad himself. I will break Lebanon over your head if you stand in my way. His murder ignited fury. Hundreds of thousands flooded Martyrs Square, demanding an end to Syria's nearly 30-year military presence. The Cedar Revolution forced Syrian troops to withdraw by April 2005, a change Hariri's death achieved in weeks. Investigations later pointed to Hezbollah operatives. Phone records and surveillance footage exposed a coordinated network, but direct proof linking Hezbollah's leadership, or Syria, to the attack never surfaced. In 2020, Salim Ayash was convicted in absentia, yet the mastermind remained hidden. Even investigators weren't safe. Wissam Aid, who uncovered key phone evidence, was assassinated in 2008. Brigadier General Wissam al-Hassan in 2012. Anyone close to the truth seemed doomed. Today, Hariri's grave near the Mohammed Al-Amin Mosque is a shrine. His assassination remembered every February 14th, not with roses, but with grief. What makes his death most horrifying isn't only the scale of destruction, it's that justice was never served. In Lebanon, no leader is safe when they stand against the forces that thrive in the shadows.
So what is the longest you guys have played a video game for in one sitting? Me, 14 hours, Star Wars Galaxies. Yeah, I'm a bit of a Jedi. So in Taiwan at an internet cafe, a man was found dead after playing video games for 3 days.
It started like any other day inside a dimly lit internet cafe in Kaohsiung, Taiwan. The hum of computers, the click of keyboards, the soft glow of monitors painting faces in blue. But somewhere, in that quiet buzz of digital escape, something went terribly wrong. A 32-year-old man, known only by his surname Xie, had checked in on January 6th. He was a familiar face, the kind of regular who'd vanish into the screen for days, sleeping face down on a desk or slumped in his chair when fatigue caught up. Nobody thought much of it when he stayed through the night, or the next night, or even the one after that. In places like this, time doesn't move normally. It wasn't until the morning of January 8th that someone finally noticed. An employee tried to wake him, but Xie didn't move. His skin was pale, his body cold. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. He'd been gone for hours. Doctors confirmed what his lifeless form had already shown: cardiac failure. His body had simply given up after nearly 3 days of non-stop gaming, dehydration, and exhaustion. Police later reviewed CCTV footage and saw something chilling. Just before collapsing, Xie had made small, desperate movements, a faint struggle, before going completely still. Around him, other gamers kept playing, unaware that death had entered their world. The whir of fans and mouse clicks continued, even as paramedics lifted his body away. Authorities said the cold weather and long hours spent motionless likely triggered his heart failure. It wasn't the first case, and sadly, not the last. Only a week earlier, another man in Taipei had died the same way, 5 straight days lost to the screen. In Taiwan, these deaths became an eerie reminder of how obsession with the virtual can quietly take over the real. Xie's family told police he'd been unemployed for a long time, and internet cafes had become his only refuge, a place where he could disappear from the world, where time didn't matter. But for him, the escape became permanent. When the news broke, it stunned the nation, not just because of how he died, but because of how long it took anyone to notice. In a room full of people chasing virtual victories, a man had lost his final battle in silence.
April 14th, 1865. Abraham Lincoln was enjoying a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C.
The night of April 14th, 1865, was supposed to be one of relief and celebration. Just 5 days earlier, General Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the Civil War. Washington, D.C. was alive with parades, bonfires, and joy as citizens looked to President Abraham Lincoln as the man who had held the Union together through its darkest hour. That evening, Lincoln decided to attend a play at Ford's Theater with his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, and their guests, Major Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris. It was a rare moment of leisure for a president who had borne the crushing weight of war. But as Lincoln laughed at the comedy Our American Cousin, death crept silently just feet away. John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and Confederate sympathizer, slipped through the theater's back door, armed with a single-shot Derringer pistol and a hunting knife. Booth knew the building well. He had performed there many times. He waited for the audience's laughter to crescendo, then pushed open the door to the presidential box. In an instant, he aimed his pistol at the back of Lincoln's head and pulled the trigger. The sound of laughter was pierced by the crack of the gun. Chaos erupted. Rathbone tried to stop Booth, but was slashed deeply in the arm with the knife. Booth leapt from the box to the stage below, breaking his leg as he landed. Still, he raised his bloody dagger and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," Latin for "thus always to tyrants," before hobbling off into the night. Lincoln, unconscious but still alive, was carried across the street to the Peterson House, a modest boarding house. There, doctors worked desperately, but the wound was fatal. Through the long night, cabinet members, generals, and his grieving wife watched over him. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15th, the 16th President of the United States drew his final breath. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton famously declared, "Now he belongs to the ages." What made Lincoln's assassination so horrifying was not just the brutality of the act, but its timing. At the very moment the nation had begun to hope for healing, it lost the man best suited to lead it. Booth's larger plot had aimed to decapitate the U.S. government entirely, targeting Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward as well. Seward was viciously stabbed, but survived. Johnson's attacker lost his nerve. Still, the bullet that struck Lincoln altered history. The assassination sent shockwaves around the world. Citizens wept openly in the streets. Church bells tolled across America. Lincoln, who had guided the country through its bloodiest conflict, would never see Reconstruction, never oversee the reintegration of the South, never fulfill his vision of malice toward none with charity for all. Instead, the U.S. plunged into uncertainty under Andrew Johnson, whose leniency toward the defeated Confederacy left scars that would last for generations.
An arrest for murder in Virginia after teens tell authorities an age-old childhood prank, the ding-dong ditch, turned deadly.
In the summer of 2005, the city of Brescia in northern Italy became the backdrop for one of the most disturbing crimes the country had ever seen. Aldo Donegani, 77, and his wife, Luisa De Leo, 61, were well known in their community. Quiet retirees who lived a modest life in their villa on Via Ugolini. They had no children of their own, but were close to their nephews, even sharing the villa with one of them, Guglielmo Gatti. On the surface, life seemed ordinary, but beneath that quiet exterior lay a secret that would soon horrify the entire nation. On August 1st, a relative arrived at the couple's villa for a visit, only to be met with silence. The shutters were closed, the phone lines were dead, and there was no sign of Aldo or Luisa. The villa itself was unsettlingly pristine. Their Renault Clio was parked neatly in the garage, along with their bicycles. Inside, there were half-eaten meals still in the oven, groceries left to spoil in the fridge, and even Luisa's personal belongings untouched. It was as if the couple had vanished into thin air. Concern quickly grew, and a missing persons report was filed. Friends and neighbors couldn't understand it. Just days before, the couple had attended Mass at their local parish and spoken of upcoming plans. They had disappeared without reason, without warning. For 2 weeks, investigators chased leads. Some believed they might have gone on a sudden trip, but that theory unraveled quickly. They had only just returned from holiday and nothing in their home suggested a planned departure. Suspicion soon began to circle around their nephew, Guglielmo, who lived upstairs. A 41-year-old unemployed man, reserved and withdrawn, he told police he hadn't seen his aunt and uncle in days. He insisted he knew nothing, but neighbors whispered about strange noises coming from the villa, about lights on at odd hours, and even the sharp smell of bleach drifting from the garage. Then came the discovery that changed everything. On August 17th, in the remote forested valley of Valpasco, alpine rescue workers stumbled upon a series of garbage bags dumped deep into a ravine. Inside, they found dismembered human remains in an advanced state of decomposition. It was them, Aldo and Luisa. Their bodies had been cut apart with chilling precision, packed into bags, and abandoned like trash in the wilderness. Even more horrifying, their heads were missing. Months later, mushroom hunters in the woods near Provalio di Seo would uncover the rest. First Aldo's head, then Luisa's, found almost a year apart, both hidden beneath layers of leaves and soil. The brutal completeness of the crime sent shivers through Italy. How could anyone do this, let alone to a frail elderly couple who posed no threat to anyone? All eyes turned to Guglielmo. A witness had seen his blue Fiat Punto racing dangerously along the Vivione Pass on the very day the couple vanished. He had looked pale, sweaty, agitated. Hotel staff recalled him arriving late at night in Val Camonica, leaving early in the morning without explanation. Forensic teams searching the villa uncovered more damning evidence. Traces of blood scrubbed away in the garage, residues in his car, and even on his shoes. It appeared that Aldo and Luisa had been drugged, killed, and then dismembered in that very garage before their remains were transported into the mountains. Despite the mountain of evidence, Guglielmo denied everything. He told investigators he was being framed, that he had nothing to do with the murders.
I was very scared. I thought he was going to die. He just fell over 3 times. He was blue. He was blue.
It was supposed to be a night of fun, just a group of teenage friends huddled around glowing screens, diving into the world of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King. The expansion had just dropped, and excitement was high. Energy drinks, snacks, laughter. It felt harmless. But as the hours turned to an entire day, and the day turned into night again, something inside one of those teens began to give way. In a quiet home in Laholm, western Sweden, a 15-year-old boy sat frozen in front of his screen. His hands still hovered over the keyboard when his body suddenly stiffened, then convulsed. His friends froze in shock as he collapsed to the floor, his body trembling uncontrollably. What began as a simple gaming session had spiraled into a medical emergency. His family rushed him to the hospital, terrified and confused. Doctors later said the boy had suffered what appeared to be an epileptic-type seizure, brought on not by illness or disease, but by exhaustion. His body had been pushed past its limits, over 24 hours without proper sleep, food, or rest. The sheer intensity of concentration, the adrenaline, and the deprivation had combined into something deadly. The doctor's words were simple but haunting. His body just shut down. Thankfully, the boy survived, but the incident left Sweden shaken. Addiction specialists began sounding alarms, calling World of Warcraft the crack cocaine of the gaming world. They said every single case of gaming addiction they treated somehow involved this same game. A game so immersive that some players quite literally forgot to eat, sleep, or move. Sven Rollenhagen from the Youth Care Foundation warned that this wasn't an isolated case. Some people are literally unable to drag themselves away, he said. They will play until they drop. And in this boy's case, that's exactly what happened. His father, relieved that his son was alive, vowed never to let it happen again. They played all day and all night, he told reporters. Maybe they got a few hours of sleep. They ate a little breakfast at their computers. After the seizure, he began speaking publicly about the hidden dangers of marathon gaming. Not to blame the game, but to warn other parents that obsession can turn deadly faster than anyone thinks. Across Sweden, concern grew. Clinics reported a surge in calls from parents terrified their children were slipping into the same pattern, eating less, sleeping less, and losing themselves in the glow of their screens. The country's National Institute of Public Health stepped in, acknowledging that while there was no official diagnosis for gaming addiction, the symptoms were real and spreading. Psychiatrists warned of a growing number of young people retreating into digital worlds, not antisocial by nature, but slowly becoming detached from the life outside their screens. You can play for 14 or 16 hours a day without breaks, without attending to basic needs, said Dr. Richard Graham of London's Tavistock Centre. For some, the consequences are severe. The boy recovered, but the story stuck. It traveled far beyond Sweden, sparking debates about whether games like World of Warcraft were just entertainment or something far more consuming. And while millions around the world continued to log in, explore, and escape, one Swedish teenager had learned the hardest lesson of all, that even a fantasy world can take everything from you when you forget that your real body still needs to live.